Soy un luchador. Durante casi toda mi existencia en un país que ha pasado por momentos históricos muy difíciles, he resistido.
Colombia has a new president, former guerrilla fighter Gustavo Petro.
Sworn in as the country's first leftist president in a ceremony filled with symbolism and promise of change.
I feel happy. This is a victory we've been hoping for more than 40 years.
The Colombia of what's possible starts today.
Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today I'm bringing you an exclusive interview with a man who has upended South American politics. In a historic election that featured unprecedented turnout by young Colombians, Colombia's first leftist candidate reached the highest office in the land. And now, President Petro has vowed to put marginalized Colombians of all ages at the center of policy and enact sweeping social, environmental, and political reforms. But will he be able to make his promises a reality? And how will the warm U.S.-Colombia relationship cool under his stewardship? And speaking of environmental reform, U.S. climate envoy John Kerry will join me later to talk about how recent legislative victories have put the U.S. back in the driver's seat in the climate fight. But first, who is Colombia's new president, Gustavo Petro? Well, he's a 62-year-old ex-leftist, guerrilla-turned-mayor-turned-opposition leader who rode a wave of voter anger to a victory over a populist construction magnate last June. Got all that? Now, when I say young people were key to Petro's victory, I do mean it. There are nearly 9 million Colombian voters today aged 28 or younger, and that's the most in the country's history. It's a quarter of the electorate. In what became known as the, and I quote, national strike, young people led anti-government marches across Colombia last year to protest growing inequality and corruption. That resulted in dozens of deaths, and it dominated news coverage across the country. With 10% annual inflation, a 20% youth unemployment rate, and a 40% poverty rate, the most educated young generation in Colombia's history felt betrayed by decades of failed government policies. And Gustavo Petro promised something very different for all marginalized Colombians. And so, Colombia elected its first leftist president in modern history. For decades, Latin America's longest-standing democracy, that's right, that's Colombia, it's also been one of the region's most conservative. Colombia's violent history with leftist guerrilla groups, such as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, known as the FARC, has meant that the office of the presidency was out of reach for left-leaning candidates. But the tiempos, as they say, they are a-changing. The less violent rebel group that Mr. Petro himself was a part of in his youth demobilized back in 1990, and the FARC signed a historic peace deal with the government in 2016. And all of that paved the way for a viable political left in Colombia. Petro's running mate, Francia Marquez, also made history as the country's first black vice president, which kind of sounds familiar. She brought with her an unprecedented number of Afro-Colombian voters. She's pretty fascinating in her own right. Her environmental activism in the past led to death threats and even a grenade attack in 2019. That's a story for another show. On the night of Petro's victory, flag-draped supporters chanted, "Yes, he could. Yes, he could," and they were riffing on Barack Obama's famous 2008 slogan. But when it comes to Petro keeping his campaign promises, how long can that chant hold true? Depends on how you define could, I suppose. Petro's ambitious social and health and agricultural proposals include free university education, phasing out new oil exploration, sorts of policies that one former finance minister called economic suicide. Petro plans to finance this social spending by overhauling the country's tax system. He wants to raise taxes on the richest Colombians by 200%. Critics, though, say the rich will just hide their wealth abroad, maybe the United States. Another big hurdle. While Petro has amassed majorities in Congress, they may not last long, and they don't ensure full support for his policy agenda. If he doesn't prioritize policies, analysts say he risks getting nothing done. Colombia's new government also vowed to formally restart relations with its controversial neighbor to the east, Venezuela, after Colombia severed diplomatic ties in 2019. Now, Petro won't veer anywhere near as far to the left as Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, though his opponents fear exactly that. But let's just say officials in Washington are wary of the warming relations. Speaking of Washington, Petro has vowed to reassess that relationship too, especially on drugs and trade. Colombia has long been the United States' staunchest ally in Latin America, and any meaningful shift in relations would have regional repercussions. But all that said, Petro has claimed there is still plenty of common ground between Bogota and Washington. How will Petro's new government reshape Colombia, Latin America, and the U.S.-Colombia relationship? Let's ask him. Here's my conversation with Colombian President Gustavo Petro. President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, thank you so much for joining us today.
Gracias a usted, a todas y todos sus televidentes.
For our international audience, tell them what's the most important thing they need to know about you as the new president of your country.
Soy un luchador. Durante casi toda mi existencia en un país que ha pasado por momentos históricos muy difíciles, he resistido. Al final hemos seducido la mayoría de la nación y ahora se trata de hacer realidad una agenda de cambios, lo cual es difícil. De eso depende mucho la historia que va a seguir de Colombia, pero estoy dispuesto a esforzarme al máximo en la posibilidad de cambiar la historia del país.
If you watch the American news and the international news, everyone loves to say, oh, this man is the first leftist president ever of Colombia. And I know you don't love that term. Tell me how you feel about it when you hear that in the West.
La política en general fluye. Alguien podría decir Washington fue de izquierdas por buscar la independencia nacional. Y otro podría decir, pero fue esclavista. Y en ese sentido, las palabras que hacen referencia en la política a lugares geográficos nos mueven hacia un relativismo muy grande. Lo que era izquierda ayer no lo es hoy. Lo que era derecha ayer quizás ha dejado de existir. El calificativo izquierda y derecha es un invento europeo, una construcción europea que poco interpreta la historia latinoamericana. Trata de asimilar Latinoamérica como si fuera una extensión de Europa. Y aunque parcialmente lo somos, no lo somos completamente. La izquierda latinoamericana se mueve más en el sentido tradicional del término, como si se pudiera revivir los tiempos de la Unión Soviética o de la Revolución Cubana, y trata de imitar su estética, su narrativa, su lenguaje, pasando también por encima de la interpretación del mundo de hoy, de las necesidades de la sociedad de hoy. Y la izquierda norteamericana, si la miramos desde la perspectiva de los nuevos movimientos progresistas, aunque logra una nueva narrativa, aún no logra penetrar el alma norteamericana, aún no logra seducir. Y eso es fundamental si queremos realmente cambiar el mundo.
Now, the model that has most failed in terms of competence in economic governance is your neighbor, Venezuela. And you, of course, are a peacemaker, and you've said that you want to reach out to Nicolas Maduro and rebuild a relationship with him. What should the Venezuela-Colombia relationship look like? And is it possible that that country can once again prosper? How can that happen in your mind?
La veo positivo. La historia de los pueblos en general, desde la Segunda Guerra Mundial para acá, es que las economías crecen entre vecinos, que el comercio mundial es esencialmente un comercio entre vecinos. Prácticamente ninguna región del mundo se escapa a que eso que llamamos globalización, antes que nada, es una relación estrecha entre vecinos. Se olvida a veces, pero es fundamental. Nosotros aniquilamos eso, lo destruimos al punto que llegamos a la estupidez de, por razones ideológicas, cerrar la frontera más grande del país entre dos pueblos que son prácticamente familiares de la misma sangre. Lo que ha ocurrido en la frontera de 2.000 kilómetros, una frontera enorme entre Colombia y Venezuela, es una crisis humanitaria,
Absolutely.
una crisis de derechos
Millions of
humanos.
refugees, millions of refugees.
Recomponer esa frontera, que pasa por recomponer relaciones diplomáticas, un poco sin pensar el interés de países ajenos a nosotros, es de prioridad nacional. Nos constituye la opción de reconstruir derechos humanos en la región. Si a Maduro lo rechazan por violador de derechos humanos, yo diría que reconstruir las relaciones diplomáticas en la frontera colombo-venezolana es el paso más serio para reconstruir derechos humanos para millones de personas, para 14 millones de personas al lado y lado de la frontera colombo-venezolana.
Haven't asked you yet about your own country, and I should start. I remember during your victory speech in June, you said that you intended to develop capitalism. Now, there aren't many people saying positive things about capitalism these days, so I wonder if you could explain what you meant by that.
Quiero decir que el capitalismo no se ha desarrollado en Colombia. La capacidad productiva que genera, indudable en la historia humana, ha sido muy raquítica en el país. El capitalismo en Colombia está más allá en los sitios de la economía popular, en la pequeña empresa que se hace en un garaje, en economías que ni siquiera son reconocidas legalmente, en la gran economía nacional, que para nosotros es grande, pero para el mundo muy pequeña. Lo que hay son privilegios, dádivas dadas por el Estado. Se ha enriquecido muy poderosamente un grupo pequeño de personas gracias al Estado, no gracias a la producción o a la lógica arriesgada de cualquier capital. Por eso, si nosotros quisiéramos solucionar necesidades urgentes, comenzaría por el hambre, por ejemplo. Hay que desarrollar la capacidad productiva del país. Y eso lo puede hacer el capitalismo. Colombia es la potencia mundial de la biodiversidad. Somos el 6º país en potencia de aguas. Pero jamás nuestro desarrollo se centró ni en esa biodiversidad ni en esas aguas. En realidad nos hemos negado al desarrollo, a pensar, a conocer nuestras propias potencialidades. Por eso tiene usted un dato como el de la tierra. El índice de su alimentación, que en el mundo tiene un promedio de 9%, que en América Latina tiene un promedio de 8%, en Colombia es del 30% de la población. A eso yo lo denomino una catástrofe.
And this year, that number is going up.
¿Cómo un país con tantas millones de hectáreas fértiles, con tanta agua, con tanta biodiversidad, puede estar en uno de los peores lugares del mundo frente al hambre? La única explicación es un gran fracaso de las élites políticas y económicas que han dirigido el país. Una especie de sinrazón económica, algo que tiene que ver es con la premodernidad. Y por eso cuando yo digo que hay que desarrollar el capitalismo con límites, con un Estado capaz de limitar, es porque queremos desarrollar esa capacidad productiva.
Now, can we say that capitalism has been rather overdeveloped in terms of coca production in Colombia right now, not to the benefit of the Colombian people or anybody else? What's your plan? What can be done to help eradicate the production and the transit of illegal narcotics out of Colombia?
Detrás de la pregunta de por qué Colombia es narcotraficante, por qué el principal exportador de cocaína, está la destrucción de su aparato productivo. ¿Cierto? Es que si Colombia fortalece su mundo agrario, agroindustrial e industrial, deja de ser narcotraficante. Es que si Colombia ve en la selva amazónica, es como una riqueza en sí misma, en donde podríamos superar incluso el que una parte de cerca de 150,000 personas campesinas cultiven hoja de coca. La selva amazónica es el pulmón y el pilar climatológico de la humanidad, uno de los pilares pocos que quedan. Es una gran esponja de absorción de CO2. Para la humanidad es fundamental
And yet,
salvar la selva.
deforestation is at record levels right now. So you have to turn that around.
Sí. Pero, digamos, mientras la selva es categóricamente necesaria para la existencia humana, el motor que se ha prendido es de destrucción de la selva. Primero, arrojando glifosato sobre los cultivos de hoja de coca, que eran muy pequeños al interior de la selva, pero que enseñaron que la selva no servía, sino que podía ser envenenada desde los químicos traídos desde los Estados Unidos. Esa manera de mirar la lucha contra el narcotráfico hizo un enorme daño, porque se vio a la selva como el enemigo, a la mata de coca como el enemigo no es más, sino el intento de ocultar que los enormes porcentajes de drogadicción que se construyen sobre drogas cada vez más duras y mortales tiene que ver es con una sociedad deformada en donde están esos adictos y no con la selva ni con la mata de coca, que simplemente es una excusa. Si la humanidad reacciona, si sabe que la selva es su pilar climático al lado de los océanos, de los polos, de la taiga y de la tundra, base fundamental de la vida y de nuestra sostenibilidad en el planeta, podemos solucionar el problema incluso, porque no está en la hoja de coca. Si a los campesinos que producen hoja de coca se les paga, y fondos habría con las tasas carbón y con los mecanismos de derechos de emisión, etcétera, en el mundo, simplemente por dejar crecer la selva con una cantidad más rentable que la venta de la pasta de coca, tendríamos menos cocaína, más selva amazónica, más vida en el mundo.
So my last question for you, since you've been president, you've met with some American officials, including today. Given your meetings and given your understanding of the United States, do you think the U.S. wants to help you?
El Estado norteamericano es como un paquidermo. Es lento. Las grandes transformaciones no suceden de la noche a la mañana, muy lentamente. He observado una mentalidad mucho más abierta en los actuales funcionarios del gobierno Biden alrededor de este tema. He conversado casi con todos. Son conscientes que la guerra contra las drogas ha fracasado, que no deja sino millones de presos, la mayoría afros, en cárceles privadas en Estados Unidos. Que si prolongamos 40 años más esta política, morirán 2.800.000 jóvenes norteamericanos por sobredosis de fentanilo que no se produce en ningún rincón de América, y que nos dejará a los latinoamericanos 1 millón más de muertos, y que las organizaciones mafiosas serán 10 veces más poderosas de lo que hoy son. Hoy, Pablo Escobar palidecería ante la fortaleza de las actuales organizaciones multinacionales de la cocaína, que son fuertes simplemente porque esta está prohibida. La guerra contra las drogas ha creado su propio enemigo, y entre más profunda, más poderoso el enemigo que produce. Esa apertura mental de los funcionarios actuales de Estados Unidos puede que no llegue a nada. La paz de Colombia depende de una nueva política antidrogas, de una nueva visión. Si no, nos condenan al genocidio. Y obviamente América Latina tiene que juntarse en esto. Hemos sido vergonzantes Por el hecho de ser productores de la hoja de coca o de la cocaína, creemos que tenemos que silenciarnos y aceptar las políticas del poder mundial al respecto, que están totalmente equivocadas. Eso tiene que acabar. Se impone un diálogo con el mundo, un diálogo con los Estados Unidos, con una voz independiente. Si se salva la selva amazónica, se salva la humanidad. Por tanto, la selva amazónica no es el enemigo. El enemigo está en otro lugar.
President Gustavo Petro, thank you so much for joining us.
Gracias. Muy amable.
As you heard in my interview with President Petro, one of his most urgent objectives, and he talks about it all the time, is to ramp up the battle against climate change. And he'll find a friend in U.S. climate envoy John Kerry, who joins me now to talk about how he thinks Biden's new climate bill will reshape the global initiative. Secretary John Kerry, great to see you as always.
Happy to be here.
Quick questions for you. First of all, given the fact that we now actually have something to talk about legislatively on climate, what's the reception been around that? Do you see, is there leadership?
Well, people around the world are excited that the United States is stepping up to do what it says it would do. And the legislation that President Biden got signed into law puts the United States in a place where we will meet our goals. And that's really important for our credibility in the diplomacy of climate. We still need to get more finance. I mean, that's the big challenge now, is the money that's going to help a big emitter in another part of the world to be able to transition. They're just a group of countries that don't have the money, don't have the ability to be able to transition quickly. They need technology, and they need some concessionary funding to grease the skid, so to speak, to make things move.
Now, Antonio's speech this year was, if it could be, a little bit more bleak even than last year's, in part because there's more emissions this year with Russia-Ukraine, of course, and the knock-on. Also because privately, he's talking about the fact that a lot of banks seem to be backsliding on ESG because fossil fuels are more attractive to invest in. How much have you seen that? How much do you worry about that?
There is some embrace of new fossil fuel projects because of the situation with Ukraine. And Russia having cut off gas, there has to be some replacement of gas to enable the European economy to be able to make it through a winter and make it grow. So there's a lot of uncertainty in that, and the price is way up, obviously, and inflation has been higher. But the fact is that I believe most of those countries are going to be able to deploy much more renewable energy. Germany, for instance, is heading towards 80% of its energy base is going to be renewable. That's extraordinary. And I think other countries are realizing the message of Ukraine, the message of Putin is you've got to be able to control your own future with respect to energy. That means get energy independent as fast as you can. We in the United States are blessed because we did that a number of years ago. We're the biggest oil and gas producer in the world, but we're also pushing to transition to renewables. And I think we're going to be in a place where we can help a lot of other countries do that over the course of the next couple of years.
Last question. Technology at scale you are most excited about in helping facilitate the transition?
Well, they're not at scale yet. None of the ones that are really critical are yet at scale, but I think they're poised to begin to make that journey. Battery storage, I think green hydrogen, electrolyzers, next generation. Maybe carbon capture. A lot of money is going to go into carbon capture, and it should, to exhaust the possibility or make it work, one or the other. But you know, who knows what's going to happen with fusion? There's a new excitement about it. There's a new level of investment in it as a result. So there are a lot of possible game changers, but not yet at scale, ready to come to scale. But all kinds of things happening in the exploratory process. In terms of direct air carbon capture, nuclear is going through a certain evaluative renewal, and we'll see where we come out on it. But I think President Biden's position is we need all of the above for the moment in order to make the transition, but he's very clear we're going to make the transition. And by 2030, we will be halfway there in terms of electric vehicles. 2035, his plan is to have the entire power sector of our country carbon-free. So we're really moving, and I'm confident that at some point we're going to have breakthroughs in these technologies.
John Kerry, wish you luck this week.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's our show this week. Come back next week, and if you like what you see, or you want to see a different president, because you never know which president you're going to see on GZERO, check it out. Take a minute. Why don't you sign up for GZERO's excellent morning newsletter? It's called Signal.